Hi everyone, good afternoon. Kalispera. My name is Jawna Standish and I'm with Keras Labs. I'm a co-founder at Keras Labs and I'm also one of the ombuds at AthensDAOx. And we've got a mixed room. Ombuds basically is like a mediator. So we talked a lot about problems in DAOs and privacy and things like that. So I can share some of those examples with you today. And I'd also like to thank Dean and Taki Sul and Wales Friend and the whole community here. Because really, I'm an example of someone that came from far away. So the last 5 summers, I've lived on a sailboat, sail around in the Cyclades for half the year. And this year I did something a little bit differently. I decided to make Athens my home base and fell in love with it, and I've been coming to Greece and have some family here for many years now, but this was a kind of a new experiment. And then when I met these guys this summer, or later in the summer, it's just nice to know that there is such a nice community here. And then this event brought all of you out, so you can see the community is growing even more and more. So thank you, and these are just some of the projects that I'm involved in. Like I said, I primarily spend the bulk of my time with Keras Labs, which focuses on decentralized dispute resolution for both Web 2 and Web 3. It's sort of a growing trend, and as DAOs mature, we start to see more of a need for these types of tools and services in DAOs. Bankless DAO, I've been one of the mediators there now for over a year. We have lots of public cases of things that have gone wrong, lots of lessons learned. I'm happy to share all of those with you. You can come find me in the room next door after this. And then we're also hosting a workshop to onboard people into Bankless DAO. So if we have anyone here that would like to join, there's 2 ways in general to join Bankless DAO. One is token gated and the other is through a guest pass. We are giving away 5 35,000 token memberships. So if you're interested, come meet me in the room next door after, and happy to onboard you into Bankless DAO. And the other thing is, last night I had a nice conversation with Michael from Marinade, and I don't want to put anyone on the spot here, but I don't know how many of you have participated in liquid staking, but I've been in this space for a few years now, and I have not done it. I've read about it. I've got good friends that work at Lido and in different ecosystems, and he agreed to take a bunch of us into the room next door again after and walk us through how we would go about doing that. He'll answer any questions. There are no stupid questions, so we can ask anything. And then any of these other projects, if you're curious about them or would like to know more after, they're mainly focused around artificial intelligence and network states. Come and see me, and I'd be happy to either get you involved or just share a little bit more about what they're all about. So the topic that I'm going to talk with you about usually clears the room out, because when people hear about policy or legal, I know we have a nice Web3 lawyer in the back of the room. I definitely want to meet you after. So when we talk about regulatory challenges in the blockchain and DAO space, the biggest challenge today, you'll get a lot of different opinions on this, but the biggest challenge really is that there's a lack of harmonization across the world, just because it's so new still. Even though all of us may have been doing this for several years, and it kind of feels like tech operates in dog years, so it might feel like we've been doing this for 15 years now. And some of you may have been in this space that long. But the way that it works today is a lot of DAOs exist by stitching together legal entities from jurisdictions around the world that allow them to do some of their activities in one country, but in order to do something else, they'll pick up another legal entity, like maybe one in Panama, one in the Cayman Islands, maybe in Seychelles, Dubai, Switzerland, and then before you know it, you have what's called legal arbitrage, and that's been going on since the beginning of time. Businesses have been doing this since the beginning of time in legal entities. It's not the most efficient way to really set up your infrastructure for your DAO. One, it's very costly, and 2, you constantly have to have a legal team to stay abreast of the legal issues in each of those countries that you have legal entities in, and we can get into that. And the other thing is, one of the biggest challenges today is that many contributors in DAOs, they don't even know people don't know what they don't know, right? Like, all of us are probably, maybe you realize it, maybe you don't, but we are still in the early days, and this is still a tiny percentage of the world's population that's involved in this. So you're like very advanced compared to the rest of the world, but many contributors in DAOs don't even know what their liabilities are. It's not to scare you, it's just, Voshi gave a great talk earlier today about the greed experiment, and I loved that talk, because if it teaches you anything, it's to be, well, hopefully not to be so greedy, but also to like stop, look, pause, question things, and before you take action to give someone rights to your wallet or to your Twitter, like, look into it, right? It's so easy that when, like if Dean told me, Jawna, go check this out, I'm gonna go check it out because Dean told me and I trust him. But, like you can see just sort of a domino effect of that can happen to a whole group of people. These types of things happen in DAOs also. So just one of the challenges before you enter a DAO or while you're in a DAO, just ask the question. You don't have to be a troublemaker, but maybe ask, do we have a legal entity? And if not, why? That's it. It doesn't mean that you need one, it's just a good question to ask. And then the biggest compliance issues that we run into, like from a regulatory challenge standpoint, are usually around what's called KYC. And if those of you are not familiar with that term, it just means know your customer or know your client. And then the other areas are around anti-money laundering. And then also the biggest risk really is around violations in securities laws, right? Because regulators can't ignore this space anymore, right? We potentially threaten central banks, we potentially threaten lots of institutions that are very, very old and are very, very, let's say, tried and true, but also very flawed. And so when we threaten those types of systems, they're gonna pay a lot of attention to us because they're gonna wanna find something that we're doing wrong, because they want to pump the brakes on us so that they can buy a little more time to figure out where they want to slow us down and where they'll allow us to move us faster. And then another area where we run into challenges around risks of intellectual property infringement. And I can get into that after, because a lot of people say, but it's open source, so what am I infringing upon? Well, you'd be surprised. Something like a website, content that you use to market your products and services, those are different in every country. So again, just to be aware of some of the challenges here. Yesterday there was a nice talk by Yel from DeepDAO, and I don't know how many of you reference deepdao.io ever. To show of hands, you guys familiar? Okay. So sometimes there's a lot of really good analytics on that site, and then sometimes I wonder, like, how, I don't know. So sometimes I wonder, okay. So last year, there was a study done with Chainalysis that said there were 4,000 DAOs. Okay, that was last year. And then this year, DeepDAO reported on that and said the same thing, but they were citing Chainalysis source. And then my DAO, which is a company that I used to work at, and Leo spoke about, the Marshall Islands exclusive registered agent. When I worked there, and Leo can probably share the same story, is that a lot of the DAOs that we spoke with, and I must have, over a year, must have spoken to at least 1,000 DAOs, the majority of them were not yet listed on DeepDAO. So it's always a question of, we don't know the exact, we know how many big DAOs there are, because that's nicely cited on DeepDAO. Other sources say there are like 50,000 DAOs. Why does that matter? Why do these numbers even matter? Because global regulators can't ignore this growth, right? Just like they're not denying blockchain, they're not denying any of this. They're saying, okay, we know that this is just going to keep going and going, and the trajectory is like this. They want to get paid, right? So traditionally they wanted tax money. They're still going to want their tax money, but then they're looking at new ways for how they can collect revenue, how they can, just new ways to get money from us, okay? It's not always a bad thing, but maybe they could be a little more creative. That's another topic. So I mentioned DeepDAO. So this is mainly my experience is around the Ethereum ecosystem. Forgive me, Dean and Taki and Wellstrand, but I'm slowly becoming a Solana convert. And it's not that I wasn't interested in Solana, it's just that when I jumped into this, I just happened to get involved like on the Ethereum ecosystem. But there's many, many things I love about the Solana ecosystem that have brought me here today. So the reason why I share this with all of you is these are the big players from a DAO perspective. And you can see just in terms of like the size of their treasury, you can see number of token holders, the proposals, participants, all these things. So there are sources where regulators can go. Regulators often use like Chainalysis. They're very familiar with DeepDAO. Regulators also love to fish around and swim around in Discord channels. Like they actually issue subpoenas in Discord. I don't know if that's happened to any of you before, but it happened on another project that I worked on, and people were like, can you issue a subpoena in Discord? And I don't know, maybe the Web3 lawyer in the back might have an opinion on it, but some lawyers said yes, some said no, and the dispute continues. But it's true what Leo said. If Gary Gensler from the SEC, which is a US financial regulatory body institution, and we may not care what they think because we're not in the US, but if you have a global project, which most of us work on global projects, there's always some long arm of the law somewhere looking to see what you're doing and maybe what you're potentially violating and what monies they could be collecting from you. So these are just some things to keep in mind here. The other reason why I brought up the DeepDAO slide with the big projects is to show you not only the size of their treasuries and how many proposals they have and the number of people voting, but it's also to show you that as DAOs mature, the bigger DAOs now are starting to put together legal defense funds. So if you're a small DAO and you have 20 people, it's not to say that you couldn't run into a big legal situation. You very much could. But as you get bigger and as your treasury grows, like if you're like a big liquid staking project or a big DeFi protocol project, you essentially have like a bullseye on your back in terms of global regulators looking to see, are you violating anything in any of my jurisdictions? Because one, they would like to use your project as precedent to shut down future projects. And they would like to collect whatever revenues or taxes that you should be paying in those jurisdictions. So we're starting to see a trend of big projects, like you can see Sushi DAO. They put together a legal defense fund. Lido has a legal defense fund. Of course, MakerDAO is one of the biggest spenders of a legal defense fund. They have their legal fund in general is over $12 million and growing. So you have a lot of the big players, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the recent case that just was announced, I don't know, like a week ago or two, in France of a project called Platypus. So that was a case where the person was doing ethical hacking and had to prove to the court that it was ethical hacking and not sort of like a rogue, nefarious hack. And in criminal court, you actually have to prove the criminal intent behind it. And so what ended up happening, long story short, is that case got put aside and they said, it's like too hard to prove. So that can be used for future clever people that want to go under the guise of ethical hacking. So it's just to give you an idea that as we mature, first of all, we are all getting more and more clever every day. So are hackers, so are rogue people, so are nefarious actors. And so we talked about working in a trustless state, or a state where we all trust each other, just sort of like automatically. Well, we also have to be careful, right? Because if I enter a DAO and okay, maybe MakerDAO is not a good example because they have a big legal defense fund, but like, okay, Bankless DAO. I'm part of Bankless DAO. And ironically, I'm one of the mediators there, so I get to see and hear all the problems about, you know, this one didn't support my vote, and we get into the whole privacy on voting, things like that. But Bankless DAO doesn't have a legal entity, right? And we've got lots of lawyers in the Bankless DAO community. There's a guild there, and they all say, we don't need a legal entity in Bankless DAO because we don't have like a big enough risk profile. So that could be debated by many, and it has been debated by many people in Bankless DAO. So it's just to say, if you're in a DAO today, or you'd like to get involved in one tomorrow, it's always a good idea to just ask the question, does this project have a legal entity? And I know that for the whole ethos of Web3, having a legal entity seems to fly in the face of like decentralization and everything. But the fact of the matter is, because the laws are not yet harmonized across the globe, you could do one of two things. You could risk no protection, but what you do is you risk alienating all of the people that you ask to participate in your DAO, because if something should happen or someone should go rogue, or like an innocent accident, somebody, I don't even want to say, but just something happens and your treasury gets locked up because one of the multi-sigs just disappeared. These things happen all the time. And you know, maybe you don't hear about them, but they happen all the time. And I think half of the time it's unintentional, it's just a bad situation, and then other times people take advantage of these situations. So there's a lot of changes going on, not just within the space, but around the world in terms of regulators paying attention to this and saying, okay, we're gonna be leading the charge for this. Like when Leo spoke earlier, the Marshall Islands is one of, actually, I'm gonna argue and say, is the only sovereign nation in the world that has legislation that recognizes not just DAOs, but the entire umbrella of NFTs, tokens, all of this. Yes, the US recognizes DAOs as legal entities, but that's on a statutory level, state by state. And as Leo mentioned, if you get in trouble or you're called into question for anything, the federal law, so like the law of the United States, takes over that particular state. So it's almost like null and void. And also it's crypto. The US is not a very friendly environment in many ways, but especially for crypto today. And when I worked at my DAO, if any of the founders were American, it's sort of like an American culture thing of a little bit of fear, because we're always afraid we're gonna get in trouble for something, for taxes, by regulators or something like this. Americans automatically assume that their legal entity needs to be in the US. It doesn't. Like me, like many of you, I'm a digital nomad. I have an American passport. I'm doing my work here. I was moving all around over the summer. I guess, you know, do each of the countries that I visit want a piece of my tax according to the law? And I looked it up in each of these countries. I didn't stay there long enough for them to come after me to collect it. I don't know, this is videoed, maybe someone's gonna come after me after, but it's just to say many countries see this as an opportunity for growth, and they're not looking to punish people, they're looking to encourage you and attract you into their country or to put their country on the map as a leader in this space. So I love the Marshall Islands. In full disclosure, I'm still a friend and shareholder and advisor at MyDAO. And the reason I recommend them a lot, 9 times out of 10 actually, is because they have legislation specifically that protects contributors and DAOs. All these other jurisdictions do not. Some of them have like really kick-ass legislation around securities. Cayman was made famous by venture capital. So that's why every big DeFi protocol project has a Cayman Foundation. You know why? Because A16Z told them, before I give you my money, you need to set up a Cayman Foundation. And I can say that with confidence because I used to work in venture capital. And so this is why every big project has a Cayman Foundation. It's because it covers you on the securities front. It does not protect the members of a DAO. So same thing, like just all these countries up here, I would just say earmark them or take a photo of it. And some other case studies, I don't know if any of you were at ETH Prague this summer, but a DAO that I like and that I reference a lot, I'm sure it has its own flaws and everything, but is MakerDAO, okay? And MakerDAO announced this past summer that it's changing its it's changing its legal framework. And now it's moving into a sub-DAO structure. And what does that mean? It means that a sub-DAO, you can have a legal entity up here, and then you can birth all of these sub-DAOs. And they're allowed to each have their own governance structure. So like, Dean, I'm sorry, you're in my line of sight, so I keep calling on you. But let's say Dean's List DAO. Let's say you implemented like a sub-DAO structure. And I'm part of Dean's List. And then I say, you know what, Dean, I'd like to do something with sailing. Someone mentioned, I'm interested in sailing too. Like, maybe we'll do like Dean's Sailing DAO or something. We could just keep birthing these one after another, and they don't necessarily have to follow the governance of Dean's List. So MakerDAO announced this strategy, which is, I think, a great strategy for them. But what happens a lot in our space is people do a lot of copy and pasting. People say, I like MakerDAO, so I'm going to do what they do. Or they say, I don't want to pay a lawyer $30,000 to tell me what I should do. MakerDAO said they're doing sub-DAO. I'm going to do that. Because when does MakerDAO screw up? Well, okay, we all screw up, but what happens is not everybody needs what MakerDAO needs, right? Like they kind of like have the Range Rover. Maybe you just need like a little Fiat. So it's just something to keep in mind. You might not need as much of legal engineering as some of these big projects, and that's why it is important to talk to Web3 lawyers and friends in the space that can help guide you. It doesn't mean you have to spend $20,000 or $30,000. You can tell them in the back. Yeah, please. Yeah, true. Here we go. So yeah, it's just to say these changing regulatory implications for DAOs and contributors and investors. The biggest thing right now is that there's a lot of changes in securities laws because regulators right now are saying, is it, is it a security or isn't it a security? So some jurisdictions have taken that question off the table, like the Marshall Islands took it off the table and said, it's a token, it's not a security. So this is why people are flocking to the Marshall Islands. This is why, Leo and I, we used to work together. I don't know how many, like 120 DAOs or something registered in the Marshall Islands in 1 year. And that number is just going to keep going up. Because very few jurisdictions around the world have such legislation. So it's just, again, be mindful of it. None of us want to get a tax bill 2 years from now that say, you owe us 400,000 euros in taxes. No one wants that message or invoice coming. And also, that's on a personal level, but also for your DAO, right? You don't want your DAO saying like has a backlog that's owed to the government in the jurisdiction where you have your registration, because maybe you don't have the funding to cover it, right? And so what are the best strategies for navigating changing regulatory landscapes? First of all, I would say don't over-engineer what you need. Like, it's hard to say because it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all, but someone like MakerDAO or Sushi or Lido, they all have like at least 10 legal entities ranging from like Panama to Switzerland to BVI, Cayman, Marshall Islands, and it each covers a different function of their DAO. They did that on purpose because, first of all, I said each jurisdiction around the world doesn't allow you to do everything you want to do. They also did that because they wanted to steer clear of the SEC and regulators around the world And then it becomes a mystery to try to stitch together how the heck is this DAO organized. So it's almost impossible to find out how it all fits together. Because maybe one legal entity manages some employees or contractors, another legal entity manages the partnerships, another legal entity manages the treasury, another legal entity manages the governance and the contributors. It can get very complex, and maybe your DAO needs that, but for the most part, most DAOs starting out need like coverage for the contributors of their DAO. So I would say look into that. Know your potential risks and rewards. Like if you're going to launch a token, be mindful of where you launch it or how you offer this to people. You don't want to be hit up for securities violations wherever maybe you have a website. Are you going to be marketing this to Europeans or to people in different worlds? You might need a different website in each geography to avoid violating securities laws. And then just some resources. Again, this is probably more, and I'll find out your name in the back. Blockchain Lawyers Group I think is a very credible resource, whether you're a lawyer or just somebody looking for a Web3 lawyer. That's founded by a legal thought leader named Francesco Paolo Patti, and he goes by Eagle on socials, so maybe you've heard of him. That's a great resource if you're looking for a Web3 lawyer in a particular jurisdiction. And in order to be listed with the Blockchain Lawyers Group, they needed to have done certain things like participate in launching a token, and so they're credible. Legal Now AI is another project. You can join the woman in the back there. I'll give you the contact details for them. That's an interesting project where they've brought together Web3 lawyers from around the world, pooling this information, building large language models, specifically not just for Web3, but also for Web2. They're also, I think, a very credible resource, and I'd be happy to share more resources with you. You can come and find me after. And then just as far as like the future outlook, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't think any of us do. But I would just say, even though it feels mature, and some of us have been doing this for a while, we're still very early days, right? There was a time where to use the internet on your phone, you had to get past the walled garden. Location-based services was ludicrous. Some countries banned it. America banned it. You had to go to Europe if you wanted to use the location on your phone. So these all seem silly now, but at one time, those were big problems, and they caused raised a lot of eyebrows with regulators around the world. And now, we can't imagine using our phone without location, right? It's just something that's taken for granted. And as far as predictions for regulatory developments, I don't have the crystal ball, but I do think you're going to see more and more jurisdictions recognize DAOs because, one, they see it as a money-making opportunity. They say, I don't want Marshall Islands to get all the business, so I'm going to copy and paste Marshall Islands, the DAO Act of 2022 and 2023, and I'm going to paste it here in Dubai or whichever jurisdiction that I list. And people like Leo and my DAO, they like that. You know why? It validates what they've done, it validates the legislation, and it validates the space that we're in. So each jurisdiction is going to have their own flavor of something like what Leo and Adam have built at my DAO. And then just as far as what potential impact in the Web3 space, time will tell. Again, maybe we'll save that for a panel talk. And then there's a lot of opportunities for innovation and growth. I joined with Dimitri because he had a background in dispute resolution. I had a background in venture capital and working with Bankless DAO for dispute resolution. That's a new opportunity to really help our space, right? Because as long as humans are going to participate in anything, there's always going to be conflict. And we're always going to do our best job to represent the best version of ourselves, but we are human, we are flawed, we make mistakes, but we learn from our mistakes. So I would just say, as you listen to these panels and maybe hear the day wind down, keep your ear tuned for areas of opportunity. Like maybe dispute resolution is boring for you, but I can assure you every DAO needs some sort of dispute resolution mechanism. It doesn't have to be a paid service, but it can just be like they write it down on a napkin. And here, if anyone wants to stay in touch, here's my contact info. If you'd like to participate in any of these projects that I'm working on, please come find me after, and I'll just turn it back to you, Chris, and just ask if there's any questions.
Great presentation, Jawna. I wanted to ask, what from MakerDAO, like, why do they need like a series LLCs? What's the benefit?
Because what was happening, so first of all, what was happening at MakerDAO is almost like similar to what's happening at Bankless DAO. When you get a large group of people and you start to form guilds or different departments within the DAO, some of them may fundamentally disagree on things, and they say, well, you know what, we're going to build like a new project within a project. And then they start to look at the governance, and they say, there's nothing that says we can't do that, so let's do that. And then people just keep forging ahead until they get told they can't do something, right? And for MakerDAO, the reason they moved to this sub-DAO strategy is because it allowed this, I call it birthing, like new projects. It allowed each of those projects to have their own governance structure. And the reason why they moved to that is it gave them more flexibility and less legal liability to match the overall mission and vision and values of MakerDAO up here. And then maybe somebody in MakerDAO said, I want to launch a podcast that's, I don't know, whatever, about this. And now you can do that, and it just, it removes a lot of that complexity. And I'm sorry, what is your name? Diana, okay. Did you want to comment on that too? But it's mostly about liability. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Excellent presentation. Thank you so much. Indeed, you have raised many, many challenges regarding DAOs. I'm a Web3 lawyer, yes, for many, many years. I also am a national delegate to the International Standardization Organization, and we are looking in DAOs deeply. One of the reasons they came up with this, let's say, tactic is because around the world currently we don't have any law recognizing DAOs. So we don't have any laws recognizing DAOs. We are working on this. Why? Because we love decentralization, of course. So we want to protect decentralization. So what they do is that they find different legal entities that are already recognized. They find the best structure in different countries, and then they match with the DAO, and then the DAO kind of has that legal entity as a representative, because the DAO wants to be connected to the real world. Otherwise, why it was created? So if the DAO wants to be connected to the real world, it needs legal personality, and they don't have it yet. So they have to acquire legal personality in one way or the other. So they decide that I will fractionalize the works of the DAO, the operations of the DAO, and then depending on the, let's say, departments, fractions, whatever, they create the analogous legal entity in the country, in the jurisdiction of their choice, but they need to connect them. So they need to provide for legal arrangements in place. They need to have agreement between the legal entity and the part, the sub-DAO, that part of the DAO. So the legal entity represents only that sub-DAO. Yeah? Okay. Thank you so much. If you need anything else, just let me know.
It is very important because also these sub-DAOs, like maybe they need a virtual asset service provider agreement, like a VASP. So if you need anything, can you say your name again?
It's Christiana.
Okay. If you need anything, come see Christiana, come see myself. You can come see Dimitri from Keras Labs. Happy to help you. Thank you all so much.
One more question. It's already been given.
Hey, yeah, so we see a lot of very public, very damaging flame wars within DAO governance, right? So how do you guys go about convincing the DAO stakeholders that dispute resolution is the right path, and private dispute resolution?
The first answer usually is, do we have a legal defense fund to go to court? 9 times out of 10, we don't. And the other reason is, if we have a DAO, typically, not always, but typically we have a group of people that originally came together with good intentions to do something for the greater good of whatever it is, whatever the mission, vision, and values. And Meme Brain said earlier, you know, when emotion runs high, logic goes down. Usually if you give people a day or two or a couple of days to step back and say, hey, would you work with Bryn again? Like, I know you guys had a disagreement. 9 times out of 10, and I've managed a lot of dispute resolution cases, 9 times out of 10 people say, you know, I would work with him again. There's like very few instances where people are so extreme. So a lot of times they do it for the continuity of the DAO. I would say that's the primary reason. And the other reason is they want to avoid going to court because they don't want the person that manages, like, I'm oversimplifying, but like they don't want the person that's managing like parking tickets to mediate basically something that happened between Chris and me and maybe the multi-sig, because the judge is going to say, what the hell is a multi-sig? Like, so now you're talking about 2 years in court, paying a lawyer, this, I don't know, is that what you want to spend your time? So this is why a lot of DAOs have agreed to this concept of dispute resolution or putting something in place. I know we're out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.